our meeting for DEIJB conversations, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging, which is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of our spiritual principles, that we are able to live out and demonstrate a radical oneness for the purpose of belonging. And that's why we really hold to these values of diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion. So that is the foundation of all of our conversations here. Today, our topic is Ain't No Privilege Like the One I've Got, and I'm Reverend Jackie Fernandez. So we're going to dive in. I have a PowerPoint, but we're going to start with a TikTok video because, you know, TikTok, you don't stop, is the title of my talk this Sunday. So I've spent a lot of time on TikTok this week. And you know, there's a lot of information out there on the topics that we talk about. So I encourage you to look for that. And I'm going to share my screen, which might just take a moment. All right, you should be seeing my screen.
So the word privilege is thrown around a lot today. So I want to take a few minutes to explain what is privilege. Having privilege doesn't mean that your life is amazing, easy, or perfect. Almost everyone has some marginalized and some privileged identities. Kimmel and Ferber describe the most privileged person as white, young, male, who is attractive, athletic, thin, Protestant, of average height, fully employed, wealthy, a college graduate with parents who are college graduates, consistently has access to healthcare without any mental or physical disability and never has been, heterosexual, with heterosexual parents, happily married to an attractive, thin wife without any physical or mental disabilities, father of healthy children, housed in the suburbs from the Northern Hemisphere with legal status and without debt. So that's it, right? This one dude is in privilege and everybody else is marginalized and oppressed. Not exactly. Let's take a look at a hypothetical example. There are two identical twin sisters. One is hearing, the other is deaf. They have the same family background, the same physical appearance. The only thing that is significantly different is their deaf or hearing identity. Let's say these two sisters are going to the movies together. The hearing sister has no problem ordering popcorn and buying tickets. The deaf sister has to deal with a communication barrier, people who are ignorant and sometimes rude about accommodating her needs, and once they sit down to watch the movie, the hearing sister has no barriers to her enjoyment. The deaf sister has to ask for closed captions or closed caption glasses, which movie theaters can be hesitant to provide. And this provides a different, more limited viewing experience. The hearing sister is more likely to see her life, language, and experience represented on film, while the deaf sister rarely experiences that kind of validation and representation. This doesn't mean that the deaf sister will always have a worse time at the movies either. Maybe, for example, someone barfs all over the hearing sister during the movie, and the deaf sister captures it on video and it goes viral. But the reality is, the theater was designed for hearing people, and it will be easier for the hearing sister to have a better time at the movies. As they go through life, almost every system is designed to benefit the hearing sister, and very few systems are designed to benefit the deaf sister. We can say that the hearing twin has more privilege than her deaf counterpart. But wait, what if we compare these two United States white twins with their hearing deaf sister twin pair from Costa Rica? Who has more privilege now? The same holds true. The hearing sister has more privilege than the deaf sister. But let's take the two deaf sisters. The deaf person from the United States has more privilege than the deaf sister from Costa Rica because ASL, or American Sign Language, is more established and protected than LESCO, Costa Rican Sign Language, as well as social services to protect and support deafness. But let's keep going. What if we compare these twins to another set of identical hearing deaf twins from Nicaragua? Here, the privilege gets more complicated. Because Nicaraguan Sign Language is the world's newest language, it is even more marginalized than LESCO. The deaf person from the United States has more privilege than the other deaf twins. The Costa Rican deaf sister has less privilege than the deaf person from the United States, but more privilege than the deaf person from Nicaragua. And the deaf sister from Nicaragua has less privilege than the other two. Now, all 6 of these imaginary twin sisters could be killing it and having amazing, successful, fulfilling, happy lives. However, the systems and likelihood of their success is not equal. To sum it up, privilege does not mean that your life is easy. It means it isn't hard by design.
All right. I'm going to get the link for that. because it was really fast. And you may want to watch it again. And also, you can pause it to read some of the text that she has on the screen. Um, so let's just go ahead and get some first thoughts, initial thoughts from that. How did that sit with you? Or feelings, if you're more of a feeling person. Linda, you are muted.
Okay. For me, it really hit home because I have a daughter with that lost her left hand when she was 2.5. And just after she came home from the hospital, I had just potty trained her, and she was in the bathroom trying to pull up her panties and her shorts. And I walked in and I said, "Could I help?" And she put her hand on her hip and she said, "I'd do it myself." And that has been um, it can be good. I raised a very independent daughter, but it has worked to her detriment because she strove so hard to not be seen as different.
Mm-hmm.
And it she ended up having to have her right shoulder replaced because she had just abused it so much from overcompensating and trying to fit in. So this was very, very home front for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And what had struck me when I watched it the first time was when she was describing the white male and all of his privilege, naming his children as healthy. That's kind of what you're talking
Yes,
about too, that's as a
yes,
point of privilege,
yes,
being a parent of healthy children
yes.
versus children who have any kind of health challenge. Brenda, what about you?
I'm just gonna go through my thoughts. The first, like when you said the white male, when they said Protestant, I went, because I guess in my mind it was always Catholic. That was privilege. So anyway, and then as it went on, I mean, my mind shifted like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and that makes sense. But then at one point there was this sense of overwhelmment of how am I ever going to being totally inclusive or do my part, especially like
Mm-hmm.
when they said that there's the 3 different types of sign language. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and that's where I think I get stuck sometimes, is that it just seems overwhelming. Like, I don't know how to embrace all of this.
Mm-hmm. That's a great, great point. And I'm going to ask you to hold on to that too as we go through our hour today, because it's really important. And I think any of the topics that we bring forward in the DEIJB work can have that impact of overwhelm, because there is so much about us as people, about us as the complex systems that we live in, the way we operate in the world, in communities. So, what we always want to do is bring it down. We don't have to be all things to all people, and we can't, right? Get lost in that. But the awareness, just as in our spiritual principles, the awareness is key. And if, once you know better, you can do better. And if we're always with that openness and the willingness to learn and to be curious and to adjust, then that is better than just closing the curtains and just living our lives in isolation and asleep to all of these topics. So, we never want to feel like we have to learn how to do every single thing, but especially as a leader of a community, what's alive in your community? I love that this TikTok really focused on using a deaf and hearing twin pair because in our community, creating a hearing and deaf hybrid space is really alive, and it's something that it's alive for us, which means we are also struggling with it. We've run into issues of after years of being able to have ASL interpreters scheduled, and Eileen, you can maybe jump in and speak to this, where we are just really struggling to get that scheduled. Do you want to comment? I'm going to toss it to you, Eileen, to see if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, it's very interesting that it's just started happening maybe within the last 3 months or so. Now, granted, we did have a couple of interpreters on our team that had other opportunities career-wise, and they had to step back. But trying to find replacements has been very challenging. We work with a third-party placement firm, basically, and they've even been apologizing that they just haven't been able to find the folks. And, one question in my mind, because it's come up a few times, is it might be difficult for a church community, especially a Unity or New Thought church community, to engage with an interpreter, because they have their own faith traditions. And sometimes they're not comfortable. I've learned this just not through our Sunday services, but with classes that we've offered, very specifically being asked, is this a religious class or is this more secular? Because the person was not religious at all and didn't want to bring that energy, to us. So there's different dynamics at work, but it has been challenging to have our Sunday services covered the last couple of months.
So even in that commitment, it can be a struggle and a challenge. But, I think really finding what's alive for a season, and now that's something that's going to continue to be ongoing for us. But in the meantime, there are other things, pronouns, really focusing on pronouns. Well, you don't have to do that 365 or 66 days a year. Can do it for a time and then come back to it after, a new season. Maybe there are, more new people and it's worth bringing it back around. So any of the topics can kind of come back around. So deep breath for the overwhelm. And thank you for presencing that, because it's easy to give into. Velma.
Privilege is a great word to use. It's a great thing to say right now. Not now, anytime. It's always good. And it's really popular these last few years. And as an African American, I'm an American. You know that I'm African. I'm African descent just by looking at me. So I'm American, right? And it's amazing because I live in Killeen, which is the largest military town in the world, a city in the world. And I love this city because it's so diverse. Traveling internationally with an American passport gives you privilege. And you feel good about who you are as you go out. When you return as an American, you feel that difference, the differences in our culture. And I've gotten to the point through my my teachings of unity as a unity minister, that I don't give a shit. Because we all are ones. You continue to study and develop who you are. You go within and you teach this stuff. You practice this stuff. And at the end, you look and see that we all are the same. And then you just look it out. We're all in the same peanut. So, per se. And I prefer, for me, to look at you, not at people, not at their differences, but at the beauty that's within, that I know who they are. Okay, that's why I can say a privilege is just a human consciousness concept. And if I keep it in my unity teachings or spiritual teachings or my metaphysical teachings, I know better. So that's why I can say I don't give a shit. It's human consciousness, So
Thank you.
I just wanted to share that, and and I tell my grandkids, "Did you not? You are an American, And that's it. Everybody look at you and tell the difference you are. It doesn't even make a difference if people want to define you as that. That's their business. That's not your business. Your business is knowing who you are and living it, not portraying it, but living it as a different thing of who you are, as a spiritual being, as a God being, full of light and love. And the rest of it, you have to continue to develop that and grow. This is what I teach my grandchildren. That's what I taught my children. And that's the way I live my life. I see beauty in all people, regardless of who they say they are. I go beyond that because I know what they are. So thank you for giving the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Velma. And you bring us back around to that point, giving the example of traveling the world with a US passport, that's privilege. In the TikTok video, they named Northern Hemisphere, which is around the world, to include Europe, as a place of privilege. But even within that, the US passport does in many, many places in the world carry that. And so, we're complex, in that, we all have some amount of privilege. We all have some amount of marginalization. Eileen, is there anything else that you want to respond with about the video? I kind of directed you on the last comment, so I wanted to give you a chance to respond.
I mean, I can agree with or relate to the overwhelm piece of it. It doesn't bother me as much as I've continued to just kind of, as you say, you take a step at a time and do with what's right in front of you and trust that the rest will continue to show up. But it was striking to me today to just see with the tiers of it in the three pairs of twins that they mentioned, just again based on where they're located and the infancy of one interpretive language versus another, and things. I think they referenced to like trying to be squashed in some way or just not made available in different countries and so forth. So where it started for me with just like white versus pretty much everybody else in terms of not versus, but compared to now it's just even within some of the marginalized communities or places, there are tiers within it, and I hadn't drilled it down before in that way. So that was something that was interesting for me to see really for the first time.
Absolutely, thank you for sharing that. And even the white male who was in the example of having all of this privilege is going to age, and age past a certain point becomes a marginalization, and potentially health deterioration. And so I think they did a really good job in that video of illuminating that it's not that any single person is only privileged. We talk about white privilege, or we talk about socioeconomic privilege kind of commonly, but there are nuances within any kind of group and category that we want to put people in. Velma, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Eileen was saying, is that it's the old-fashioned thing of separation. Even a white male have his issues as well. As people consider him as privileged. He also have issues within that category as well. So I look at it from a different perspective, as the old saying of separation. We had to separate this, and those six beautiful characters that you presented. It was a really good idea. I really liked it. And I keep saying this all the time. It's just separation, separation, separation. You go into any community and there's still separation. So if we can eliminate that idea of separation and start thinking about inclusion versus separation, I think we may have a better chance of unity or connectivity.
Yeah. It's so important, because so women are more likely to become injured in a car accident because all of the safety measures are tested with male bodies. Women are going to pay about $1,300 more per year on beauty products, clothing, anything like that. The pink tax you may have heard of, because something is marketed towards women, it could be the same product. It's going to cost more. than something that is marketed toward men. So there are, real world impact. If you've heard of the sort of diet fad, intermittent fasting, and I could even call it a technique of fasting for a period of time and only eating during a window, like a common window is to eat within 8 hours of a day, and then you're fasting for the rest of the day. And it's for weight loss, it's for health, it can help control prediabetes and that kind of thing. Well, that does not work long term for a female body, but that information is not really out there because it's a fad diet and it's just promoted out there, and women are targeted for it as well, but because our hormones are different. And so there's so much in the pharmaceutical industry as well that and doctors are often not, unless they pursue it, are often not taught the differences. So there can be, the privilege, like that male privilege, is very similar to a right-handed privilege. And I know, Eileen, you can, if I can out you as a lefty, I mean, it's a right-handed person's world, right? Right? Sit on the right hand of the throne. I mean, it's even in our religion, right? It's in scripture. The right hand is the favored place, and the place of righteousness. Even Mr. Fillmore metaphysically would interpret that way. And so there are ways that we so I love what you're saying, Velma, about seeing past our differences, but there are ways that it's really important for us to recognize the impact of how privilege creates a very different life experiences for people, so that we can be aware, acknowledge, attempt to sculpt our communities, our spiritual communities, in a way that that reduces the favor of privilege in different ways. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. Let me get it set up here. That's not the screen I want to share. There we go. Okay, so you're seeing my title page there. So privilege, let's define it. It refers to unearned access to resources as a result of a person's social group and memberships, right? Privilege is a right or exemption from liability or duty granted as a special benefit or advantage that is at the expense of another person and or group of persons. And so this is the definition put out by the Office of Equity at the University of Colorado in their Denver Anschutz Medical Campus. So it's unearned access to resources based on a group of however we want to identify it. And that's why I started with the TikTok, because she really outlined a lot of different ways that aspects of our lives that we are divided up by job, by where we live, by what kind of marriage we have, what our gender is, what our sexual orientation is, what kind of children we have, what kind of religion we practice, all of those things, which hemisphere of the world we live in. The other thing I would add to this, it's a benefit of the doubt. So those with privilege get a benefit of the doubt. And we see that when you see a white person open carry a weapon, a gun, versus a Black person open carry a weapon or gun. You see the benefit of the doubt giving to the white person over the Black person. And we even see that with a person who speaks with an accent, speaks English, but with an accent, may not receive the same benefit of the doubt with someone who speaks good Midwestern English. So we want to just really be clear about what privilege is. It doesn't mean that if you have privilege, because we all have some degree of privilege, it doesn't mean that you don't have any problems. It doesn't mean that life can't be hard for you, that you don't have struggles. It does not mean that. What it means is that you carry privilege based on something that you didn't earn. There's a really great video that's taken that gives an example of having students and they're going to go on, let's say, a mile run. But they all line up at the starting line, and the teacher asks them questions. Step forward if both of your parents are married. take a step forward if both of your parents graduated from university. Take a step forward if you have health insurance, and goes on with all of these different kinds of things. Take a step forward if your parents own their home. And then the race begins. So the students who have privilege and advantage are starting ahead of those who don't. And so it's a really good, it paints a picture of what privilege is. It doesn't mean that those students up in the front aren't going to still have to run and maybe break a sweat to get across the finish line. And there will still have to be some effort made to do that, but it won't be as much as some of the other students who may have not taken a step at all in that direction. So why do we talk about privilege? And Velma raised a good point. It's, when we get into these conversations, we are talking about the ways that we separate and divide each other, the ways that we label each other. But we also get into how we create our laws, how we create safety measures in our products, and things like our vehicles that we use every day. If you have the privilege of owning a vehicle, or if you live in a city and you have the privilege of choosing to use public transportation while you keep your vehicle garage so that it's only the weekend car to go out to the Hamptons or whatever. So there are different ways that even something that might look the same on the outside, the way it's being presented or experienced, or for the reasons it's being experienced, can actually be wrapped into privilege. So privilege can lead to inequity. So when we want to talk about oneness and we want to talk about how we create a space that is truly inclusive, we have to be aware of the privilege that is in the room, because it can lead to inequity. We must understand privilege to support the values of diversity, equity, inclusivity, justice, and belonging. And many, many of our spiritual centers have inclusiveness or inclusivity as a value, or diversity as a value. So we really want to be clear why we are talking about privilege. The other reason, and I think the more human and even spiritual reason, that's not about our systems and how we maybe create policy or practice, is really about cultivating empathy. And we talk about privilege so that we can have empathy, to demonstrate empathy and compassion, that we do not live in a meritocracy, which is the narrative, the American dream. Anyone can achieve anything if you work hard enough. And that is false. We do not live in a meritocracy. So if we talk about privilege, when we talk about privilege, we are also demonstrating self-awareness, empathy, and compassion, that we all have different experiences in life that impact our ability or level of success, or what it takes to achieve any certain level of success. And, again, it's not to we would sort of fly in the face of our spiritual principles to say, the less privilege you have, you're just not going to be successful. We're not saying that, but it's about the awareness and really being able to be honest and have empathy and compassion for people who are simply just going to have to strive harder or take different action. So a person who is deaf going to the movie theater, in that TikTok video we saw, they have to find out if they can get any kind of hearing devices. They have to see if they're going to be able to talk to a ticket taker or someone at the concessions who is going to be willing to engage in communication with them, probably not knowing ASL. Is a very different experience than someone who can run in almost late to the movie and just fly through the tickets, fly through the concessions, and run in and pick a seat and not have to have any accommodation in order to have that experience. Again, empathy and compassion. So typical groups of privilege. Sorry, that is an extra slide. Oh no, what happened to my groups of privilege? Here we go. Privilege in spiritual spaces. So Christian, and I love Brenda, that you said, well, I thought it was Catholic. And I wonder if that's regional or even maybe by city, because I'm thinking of the city where I graduated high school from. My idea of who had privilege in that town, and it still may be true this many years later, is the Mormons, because they were the wealthy families. And there were so many, like the percentage of Mormons in that town was very high. And now they even have, like, I think a temple has been built there. The steakhouse was like kind of like the main, like sort of church in the town, and then there were other churches in different neighborhoods, but now they have an actual temple. And so, but even Catholic and Mormon are still sort of variations or in the Christian bubble. So Christian dominant in the US. So all of us here on this call are in the US, and there may be some folks from Canada or elsewhere listening, but Christian dominant in the US. Hearing and sighted communication. Most of our centers, spiritual centers, are basing our communications for people who are hearing and sighted. Able-bodied structures. Nonprofits are not required to abide by ADA. Of course, we are encouraged, and many of us will do that, but it's not a requirement. White dominant congregations. Most of our spiritual spaces in Unity and New Thought, not all of them, but most of them have white dominant congregations. And socioeconomic status. Now I put parentheses here because of course, we have people from all across the spectrum of socioeconomic status, but we want to break it down to transportation. You know, if you're going to church on a Sunday, you're going to a service, you have a way to get there, whether that's your own vehicle, a ride with a friend, that's social capital, you know, or whether you're taking an Uber, all of that is a form of privilege, being able to have the transportation to get there. Housing. Most people who attend our services are housed, not across the board, not 100%, but the majority. For those who are watching online, most will have internet and some kind of device to accommodate that. So that's a privilege. A prosperity teaching. The fact that we hold prosperity teaching in as one of our main teachings is, you know, part of what impacts the socioeconomic status and experience. So let me say it this way, the socioeconomic status that someone has and lives, and how they engage with prosperity teaching, receive it, believe it, live it, practice it. There's privilege all tied up in that. That's too much to untangle in this hour, but I really want to name that. And work schedule. So those who are able to have Sundays off when most of us have our main service, that's a privilege that we don't think about unless you know someone whose schedule changes, and it might come more to your attention to the night shift, and they can't come every week, but they might try to, you know, once in a while. But being able to be in person in community it requires a level of privilege. Food. You know, there are some people who might come in order to get some food, but also if someone doesn't have food, housing, transportation, and those kinds of basic things, they are less likely to, you know, have a priority of going to church. And I'm not saying that from a moral or value place, but because if you're hungry and houseless, you know, there are probably other things and focus on your mind. And, you know, there's a history of church that, you know, is supposed to be like the place for that, as a place for someone to receive care and help in that way, food and assistance with housing. So, you know, it's something to really just be aware of what happens in our spiritual spaces and how people are experiencing that. And so, you know, I named for our community that creating a hearing and deaf hybrid space has been a focus for us. Now, right behind that is, well, what do we do when we have someone who is deaf and blind? You know, because the ASL interpreter is not going to help that person. That requires a second interpreter, and on and on. So we can only do what we can do with the resources that we have. But again, it's the awareness, like knowing that that's tucked in the back of my mind, that as we cultivate relationship with the deaf community, we're going to bring more intersectionality forward with the deaf community. And so there's going to be a domino effect or an expansion of what else we might need to address in order to really create an inclusive space for that community. One thing we don't work with or really talk much about is, what if we get people who are hearing, but English is their second language, or not speaking English? You know, what are we doing in terms of interpreters for that? And how are we going to accommodate that? Not that I suggest that we get interpreters of every kind, live interpreters, but technology is available to us. And so what is the plan in place? Or for example, when we've had some Sundays where we have been unable to provide an ASL interpreter, again, technology is an option, but having that in place, like sort of in an emergency time, and then having the people who can support the use of that technology, that's another space that we have to grow into. So really being able to sort of assess and keep all of these aspects in mind of what privilege exists in your congregation simply by the fact that people are able to show up on a Sunday. And then being able to look at who's maybe not coming on a Sunday because they work, but they come to every class you offer, or every workshop, or every evening service that you might offer. They're showing up to that. And how are we cultivating those relationships and nurturing their spiritual growth in the same way that we are with our Sunday folks? I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions or comments with anything I've said. I've just kind of gone through a smattering of things. Okay, go back to the slide. So there's a group in Seattle called Equity Matters, and they are a group of, I think, 5 women of color who do consulting work with businesses to help them bring DEIJ into the workplace and really look at places in their hiring process or in their HR, even in their meetings of how they can create more equity in the workplace. And it's a really fun website to go to. Just Google Equity Matters, and it's in Seattle. I mean, they have like bingo games and bingo cards that you can play. And during a meeting, of course, you don't want to write names on it, but it'll give examples of things that are said that show privilege and power. And so it's a way to sort of observe what's happening in your meetings and assess those things. So don't worry if you can't read the font there. I've got a couple more slides. I broke it up so I could blow it up a little bit, but this is what they call fakequity, and it's fake equity. So it's based on the premise that fakeness is bad and equity without action is what they call fakequity. And so those first levels, it's kind of, it's a reverse pyramid. So it's showing at the top. We'll start with the red. Fakequity is all talk, no action. You think you're doing equity work, but you're really passing off a project as equity and perpetuating the same power dynamics with no community accountability. Systems stay the same, but you anticipate different results by having a, quote, if I build it, they will come, end quote, approach. Same stuff, different label. You still hold the power and are selfish with sharing it. You take the easy road. So that's the baseline of fakequity. The next level is potlucks and fake community engagement. You host a, quote, multicultural potluck, end quote, as a way of, quote, increasing diversity, end quote. And then you wonder why no one but people you know show up. When you want, quote unquote, feedback or, quote unquote, community engagement, you invite people to come to your meeting and you lecture at them for 2 hours, use stats and meaningless jargon, and give them comment cards to fill out as a way of gaining feedback and don't follow up. So this is a performative. Like you're doing something maybe with the right intention, but not with very, very much depth to how you're actually executing that. Forks and shoes. You are a fork amongst chopsticks. You go to their place, whoever the they is, and inconvenience your schedule because you think that is what they want, but you hold on to your own customs and beliefs. You leave your shoes on and you ask for a fork instead of using chopsticks or your hands, as is customary in other cultures. You think you're a badass because you go out of your way to attend some cultural events where you were the only person that looks like you. You still hold a lot of power and do most of the talking. I'm going to give an example of an experience I had that it was similar to this. Although when I was there, I was really doing my best. But what I realized in this experience is that you can't shirk your privilege, right? It's there. And so I was invited to offer a prayer for a memorial service for one of our ASL interpreters who is hearing. She is bilingual in that her native language is ASL. She learned that first as an infant because her older sister was deaf. It was her older sister who passed away. So she asked me as their spiritual leader to come and offer a prayer. Now, of course, the entire service was offered in ASL. I knew it was at the Deaf Community Center, and I knew that most of the people were going to be deaf. But I didn't really think about that other than feeling really good that I was invited to offer the prayer because I care very much for this family. And I knew some of our other deaf congregants were part of that community as well, would be there. And so it was on my way there and into the parking lot before it even occurred to me to wonder, apart from our hearing ASL interpreter, who's grieving the loss of her sister, if there was anyone who was going to be able to interpret for me. Didn't even cross my mind. I just made the assumption because I am a hearing person, I can go anywhere and have access to language. Did not occur to me until I pulled into that parking lot and was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. And then I started to get nervous. And then I started to feel anxiety of what it might feel like, for someone who does not have, as even just in another country, which I have traveled to a place where English was not the language. And Italy is a really good example of in the cities, you can find people who speak English. But I was traveling in some smaller communities where I had met someone who was the first American that they had ever met, and they were in their early 20s, and English was not was not there. Fortunately, I know a little bit of Spanish, and we were able to make do with that. But anyway, back to this experience here. So they had, of course, taken care of me because, of course, they would. That there was someone who was assigned to me to be my personal interpreter. And then I felt terrible because I had like sort of guilt, which, so privilege guilt of that they used resources, and now there was a person who, instead of participating in this experience completely, was also having to follow me around to make sure I could connect with people. But seating, all of the aspects of being in this, what was not a hybrid space, it was a deaf space. And so I was one of very few people who were hearing in that room, and the room was packed. There were, I don't know, maybe 75 to 100 people in there. And so I had that experience of, oh, I don't even know how to behave. I had thought ahead to learn how to say hello and nice to meet you in ASL, how to communicate that, how to sign that. And then, in the moment, panicked and was terrible at it. But, I saw people signing it to me, and so I would kind of just try to mirror it back. So feeling that way, I just share that to walk you through, and you may have your own experience of, and it could be of maybe having a lot of money and walking into a space where you're the only one who is wealthy, or vice versa, walking into a space where everyone is wealthy and dressed to the nines and driving nice cars, and you're like scraping by just to be in that room. There are lots of different ways that we walk into these spaces, and the question here is the fakeity. So I settled myself and just thought, I just need to be here and be as present as I can. And I was just really overcome with this, that I cannot shake the privilege that I am a hearing person. And I just walked in here without any care or concern if I was going to be able to communicate. I knew that Stacy was going to, actually, no, our ASL interpreter's spouse is the one who interpreted. So they had a deaf person interpret my prayer. I had sent it ahead of time so that they could know what I was going to pray. But apart from that, I had given it no thought about how my presence would be impacted and would impact the space. And then also what my experience would be, and not knowing what to do about that. And even to say, like, I'm hearing, like, I need to say that to people, because clearly I couldn't speak the language. I couldn't sign, the language, and feeling like sort of nervous about, like, do I have to announce that to people or in some way? Or it's just going to be obvious. So anyway, I just wanted to share that as just a personal anecdote. it was unintentional, fakeity, but it's a learning curve, and I learned a lot just from that experience. So we'll go on further to the bottom part of the chart. Awareness raisers, all the talking. You go to their place, whoever the they is, but you at least think ahead and ask if you can bring food, which I also didn't do, and it was a potluck. Congratulations, you remember to take off your shoes and you mastered the chopsticks. However, it is still your meeting and you do all the talking and hardly any listening. You failed to follow up and there is little to no accountability. And I think about gender and women in the workplace. I think being at least female presenting on this call, that just saying that much, you might be able to think of some examples in your own life where, women, coming back to that idea of the benefit of the doubt, men have always had the benefit of the doubt that as they climb the ranks of the corporate ladder, that they are capable, where women have had to prove themselves over and over and are questioned along the way and, accused of getting there in other ways and that kind of thing. So it takes me there for that, because then we get into this sort of performative, we're all together, we're all working together, and sure, you can be in the room, but we're still going to take control of this space from that power and privilege perspective. But we're getting closer to true equity, because at least there is the taking off of the shoes, there's the mastering of the chopsticks, there is some, moving into a place of and space of equity, but there's still that power and privilege at play. So equity brave. You practice equity in your work. You are thoughtful and gracious and speak up for those not at the meeting. You promote equity by telling people to stop talking to you and listen to the community. You work to change policies, procedures, and systems to be more inclusive and thoughtful, but you still hold on to your seat at the table. People seek you out for too many committees. You are very good looking. I love that. These people are really funny. So if you go to their website, you'll see their humor at play in everything they produce, even just the fake witty concept that they're presenting here. So the final level is equity champion. You play a supporting role and let communities, those that are disproportionately impacted, communities of color, etc., lead. You let them lead. You use your position and influence to encourage accountability to the community. You open doors not from the community, but accountability to the community. You open doors for others who are the most impacted. You relinquish control and know the work isn't about you. Your work drives towards action, not just talking. You have a glow about you and you smell nice. All right. Privilege in and of itself is not good or bad. It's what you do with it. So the ideas are here to think about it, talk about it, act on it. So when you think about privilege, you commit to self-education. Listen and learn about other people's challenges. Talk about it. When we learn something, it's really good to talk about it, because then we learn even more, and it's a form of self-reflection as well, as you hear, if you're hearing the words come out of your mouth. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Challenge others, ask questions, invite perspectives, and exchange data. So get into the conversations and perspectives. And, thinking back to what Velma shared about that, seeing past the differences and into the beauty and the oneness of each and every one. This is how we get into that place of belonging. And I think it's so important for us, especially in our spiritual communities, to allow that getting comfortable being uncomfortable, that is how we can get past sort of the dressed in our Sunday best, that, well, everyone belongs here because we said so. But being uncomfortable, that, having to send an email out on Saturday to the deaf community saying, we don't have an interpreter for you. You might not want to come. We do have iPads available that will have the closed caption. We hand out the iPads on Sunday. There's no closed caption activated on the YouTube. So we got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We're going to step in it, but we're challenging each other. We're asking questions. We're inviting perspectives and having an exchange of data. And then act on it. Amplify voices, and decenter yourself. So do you understand what that means? So instead of making the perspective of privilege centered, we're decentering that and allowing those who have less privilege to be able to represent themselves and speak for themselves and to have voice in the room and support those underrepresented groups to speak, to write, to teach, create spaces for leadership and voice. Those are the actions that we can take. So we've got just a few minutes left. What's coming to mind for you?
What's coming to mind for me is the celebration of life that I will be doing for someone I do not know tomorrow. And that in itself is a challenge. But it was his request. And his wife is from the Dominican Republic. I do not speak Spanish. And just putting the service together has been a challenge enough for me, but it makes it difficult to know whether I'm going to be understood. I know that a smile is universal, but words are so powerful. And I want her and her family to feel honored above all things. And it's time for me to learn how to speak Spanish. I live in New Braunfels, Texas, right next door to San Antonio and right next door to Austin. So, at 82, I need to learn to speak Spanish. Pure and simple.
Congratulations. I love that.
Let me chime in.
And it's going to take some time. You know, I took a very basic ASL class and I still feel like I know nothing, but I did it. And it's about the openness to that, right? It's about the intention that we're setting, because that speaks volumes.
Yes.
You know, and it's a moving closer. It's a decentering yourself. You're getting off the center of, you know, English is our language, and you know it is not. There is no national language. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And I would offer to you, if you script your service, that you might you could run it through a translator and like on Google Translate, but then give it to someone you know. Even in Unity, we have some ministers who are bilingual to check that and offer that to the family later. You could, you know, send it later. That would be a way.
What a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And fortunately, the funeral director speaks Spanish and understands Spanish.
Yeah.
And he's the one that was able to get the basics from her for the obituary.
Wonderful. And you know, there are Unity, you can go to unity.org or silentunity.org and you can click onto the Spanish version of those websites and you can get, and you would recognize it. You can get like the prayer for protection, you can get some affirmations that are in Spanish. And even if you print those out, don't feel like you have to try to read them out loud, but just to have something that you can give or hand to the funeral director, and maybe he or she can say it with you after you or something like that. That would be just an easy way without adding too much to your plate the day before, but it would be an easy way that would really, I think, be meaningful.
Thank you, Jackie. This information has been wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good. Velma.
I want to tell Linda that with her grace, she'll be understood. You know, Linda, you're so beautiful. All your love will just pass straight through. You don't have to worry about a thing.
Thank
you.
That is
because
true.
You're beautiful.
That is true.
Linda. You
that
push
is
it
true.
out there. You don't have to worry about it.
But there are steps that we can take that can take it further and to lean into that connection, and the very simple things that we can do that can take it further. So yes, you know, the tone of your voice, the presence, the impact of just your presence in the room. Yes.
I have to rely on that.
Yes, and there are just little things that you can do that can make that connection even more connected.
Yeah, those tools that you mentioned are great tools, you know, that you shared with her. and you know, that we all could use when that occasion occurs. And or even when someone comes in non-speaking, we can share that with a non-speaking English person, we can share that with those tools with them. But Linda, you got it, baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Velma, it is so good to see you. My goodness, how long has it been?
Yeah.
Brenda or Eileen, do you have anything, any thoughts that you want to share?
I'm good. I'm just loving all of this.
Good, good. Thank you. I'm gonna take you to the last slide because I go on sabbatical next month. So we will have our fourth Thursday meeting in July, in which will be our reflection session on this topic. So I want you to keep working and thinking about the ideas of privilege. And if you're watching this recording, please join us. Watch the recording, take a look at some of the materials. This PowerPoint will be on the ESCR website along with the video recording. So even for those of you who are here now, if you want the PowerPoint, you can go ahead and download it from there. As you know, I give you a homework assignment, create an identity map, which I didn't cover, but that's part of the Equity Matters website. But I'll just tell you, for this purpose of just writing out and listing your privilege. And then write out and list ways that you feel like you are marginalized or don't have privilege. And again, that's just for personal awareness. And sometimes there can be a healing in that, in just naming it and having compassion and empathy for yourself. And then also, we want to take it to community and assess opportunities for more equity in your ministry. So, where are there some opportunities, Brenda? You don't have to do everything. No, and I say that to all of you, but where are some like low-hanging fruit opportunities to offer more equity in your ministry? So August, we won't have any sessions. I'll be on sabbatical. The second Thursday of September is World Day of Prayer, and the 11 o'clock prayer service is live with the keynote speakers from the opening ceremony, of which I am one. So I invite you to watch us. We'll be, I think, on Facebook. Maybe you have to register for that. I'm not sure yet. But I invite you to watch us. I will pre-record that particular session, and I'm going to bring the DEIJB conversation to prayer and meditation and talk about the ways that the intersectionalities, the privilege, and all of the topics we've covered come into play through prayer and meditation. So I will make that available for everyone to watch. And then on that fourth Thursday in September, we'll come together and talk about it and reflect on that. Okay. So that's the scoop for where we're going here over the next couple of months. And I thank you all for being here, and bless you. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.